Come on. No one could argue against the fact that a moving carp is infinitely more hookable than a carp that is just munching stationary on a spot. If I could get them feeding how I wanted them to feed, then I would get a bite on anything I attach to my hair. I think carp are the greatest tool for making us look like we don't know what we're doing and we haven't got a clue. I guess over the years I've become known as something of a boilie-only angler, and to a great extent that's true. They are such an effective form of bait. They still work as well today in every environment that I've come across as they did in the past. So I have continued to use them. Yes, I do use them in large quantities, only occasionally and not all the time. It takes me a long time to get to a point where I'm using a lot of bait on the water, and we'll go through that in a little while. The boilers themselves, I used to roll my own bait. I got into so much trouble in the army, in the sergeant's mess, rolling boilies and smelling their kitchen out and storing it in their freezer with all the sergeant's mess food in it. Yeah, the chief cook used to, tear his hair out at me, but it was all done in a little bit of fun. But I couldn't roll that much bait. But I did at times use as much as I could, and it always taught me, basically, I thought more the merrier. I had to learn when to use it over the years and when not to use it. But in the main, I could get away with a fair amount of boilies. Now, for me, things changed drastically. In 1993, I met a guy called Dave Lane, who is a very, very good friend of mine since that day, in the winter of 93, 94. And Dave has just started using a very, very brand new bait company called Mainline Baits. And he got me the following week 10 kilos of the original Grange. A bait that changed the face of carp fishing, as Tim Paisley once wrote. It had almost as much effect on carp fishing as the hair rig did, and it was an incredible concoction. Kev Knight and Steve Morgan up at Mainline Baits, the secrets are in their heads, and I had absolutely nothing to do with that over the years. I took that to my local lake, Little Army Lake. It's only about a mile down the road from where I am now, and brings back wonderful memories. And basically, I'd heard about people putting lots of boilies in, so I did just that. At 25 yards with 2 hook baits in it, I put 9 kilos of those 15mm new Grange into the area. People on the lake were looking at me gobsmacked. It hadn't done a bite in 3 weeks. By the morning, I'd caught 11 fish up to 31 pound, and it changed my whole outlook on bait entirely. That one sort of 24-hour period of my life. I think Dave got more fed up with me asking for more bait than I did finding people and asking people to store it for me. But yeah, it changed everything for me. And used properly, boilies, to me, are the most effective bait we can use. Yes, people want to use particles. Yes, people want to use pellets. They are a cheap option, and carp will eat them. I'm sure of that. But I think for me, it's easier to get a bite over a bed of boilies. And one of the reasons why I changed the shapes, the sizes rather, of the bait that I use. I think if you go up and put 20 18mm boilies around a hook bait, I can think probably millions of times carp have come across that scenario, and it's probably when their little alarm bells start ringing and they'll just swim over it and head off into the distance. With different size baits, I think it lends an element of confusion. Yes, I can change my hook baits. 2 15mm, a 15mm and a 10mm, 2 10mm. Sooner rather than later though, I decided, or it became to me not an issue at all, what the hook bait was. If I could get them feeding how I wanted them to feed, then I would get a bite on anything I attached to my hair. For confidence sake, of course, I used boilies that represent my free offerings, and in those free offerings, I very often, when tench and bream aren't a problem on the water, include a few of our response pellets. Now, response pellets are an incredible pellet. They come in the flavours of the boilies I use for one, and the main reason I use them is they break down so quickly on the bottom into the silt where I invariably fish all the time, and it always leaves that smell there, always attracting the carp back to that area. Even if in the winter, when the birds have picked everything up and ruined the spot, they can't pick those pellets up. They break down into the silt and leave that smell there all the time, and it keeps the carp coming back for more. Yeah, boilies for me, they go everywhere I go. There will be 3 or 4 kilos of hybrid boilies at the moment. I've been using those probably for 11 years now. The first bite I got on them was a 44-pound mirror from Manor Lake on linear fisheries all those years ago, and I've not stopped since. It's been so successful. And yeah, there's a lot of things about boilie fishing though that people don't seem to factor in. And those are the things that I'd like to just cover with you now. There's a wonderful old saying that goes around the world, familiarity breeds contempt. And I can think of nothing more of a carp's reaction to seeing the same old thing over and over and over and over again. It's that familiarity that I think it registers with them. I'm not calling carp intelligent. It just registers with their instinct, and that level of fear comes up. So to that end, I'm trying to change what I do all the time. I'll come to quantities in a little while, but I've talked about putting 15 mil, 10 mil, and the little tiny response pellets all together into a mix. Where I never try and very fashionably put all my spods down the same hole and make it a very, very tight area that I'm baiting. I try and spread it out as much as the weed and the feature will allow. Generally, I'm trying to find spots connected to the gravel where the silt begins. That's where my hook baits will be in most of the lakes that I fish, and as tight to the weed as possible. But I want to spread that bait out. I don't want it all clumped together, and there is no one could argue against the fact that a moving carp is infinitely more hookable than a carp that is just munching stationary on a spot. I think this is why rigs become this crazy subject, because people don't understand why they're not picking up over these very fashionable, tight little baited areas. Get them moving between mouthfuls. That has always been my way. I'm not suggesting it's for everyone, but it works for me. And spreading those baits out. Now, whenever I put 10, 15 mils and my response pellets, no baited area is ever going to look the same. It's always going to be a little bit different. And I think that helps, especially when I'm concentrating on a single water. Now, I've got one other trick that I use, and I'm not saying I'm a two-trick pony. I do have other methods of catching carp, but I use PVA. I use absolute miles of it in my fishing when I'm trying to do something a little bit different to everybody else. And I can guarantee this, I have never ever seen anybody else ever do the things I do with PVA. I understand that it costs a little bit to do this with, but what you are creating is something very, very unique. I don't want to do it with grain bait. That's not what I'm after. I'm after those boilies and those pellets appearing on the bottom exactly as they've come out the packet. I I attach them to the hook with a little dumbbell bottom bait and a long hair. And depending on the distance I want to cast, depends on the size of the bag. The smaller the bag, the further I can go. I have put these things well over 100 yards. Whether I can do that now when I'm 61 years old, I'm not so sure. But the other thing I do with them, once that hook bait is in position, is I can fire these out with a catapult. And if you're suffering for distance, just pick some bigger stones than that up off the floor and put a couple of those in, and they'll go absolutely miles out of a good catapult. Now, what you're doing is again creating a very, very unique baited area. Something, I'm not suggesting it confuses the carp. I don't know if they can be confused. I just think gives them the confidence, that little bit more confidence to come in and feed on the way that it's been presented. It just works for me and has done everywhere I've ever gone, really. And you know, a lot of people want to get the water, say, oh, they don't get caught on pop-ups here or whatever. Then the first thing I'll do is use a pop-up and spread a bit of bait around it, and 9 times out of 10 it works. It's the way that it's applied, and it needs some thought. It isn't just some bait splodged over your hook bait. It needs to be thought about, and it needs to be done in a way that is maybe just a little bit unique to yourself. There's also the big question about pre-baiting with boilies, and I've done all my pre-baiting with boilies. I must tell you, I never use the PVA bag form to bait up with. I think things would get a touch expensive if I ever did that, so that isn't used in the pre-baiting. It'll be used after when I want to catch one. But to begin with, what I'll do, I'll probably start my pre-baiting by just using 15mm boilies. Spreading them out in an area, not trying to be absolutely precise with it, and just to see what the reaction could be to that bait. It depends on the stock density of the water, and depends what I'm fishing for, of course. You know, I'm not going to do it if it's under an acre waters with 20 fish in it. That's not the kind of thing I'd want to be doing. But on a well-stocked water, if you can do it, then try and pre-bait. Thinking a little bit outside the box. Carp just don't swim up and down the middle of a lake, picking up the traps that are normally set there. There's the biggest feature of the lake's the margin, all the way around. It's the biggest feature of any lake. And the carp get in there. The bottom of that marginal shelf is one of the greatest target areas for me, and I do like to bait up with them. And I'll give you an example. The double boards is a swim not more than a mile behind me. I'm here at Willow Park Fisheries in Hampshire, and Frimley's just up the road. All of my life I wanted to catch. From the age of 6 years old, I'd read about Richard Walker's 44-pound common, and Frimley at the time held one called Charlie's Mate. And I went down, I'd go down there at 2 o'clock in the morning. You're only allowed on the lake fishing for 48 hours, then you have to be off for 48 hours. And then whilst I was off, if that swim was empty, I'd go down and bait just to the right of it in the mouth of a bay, only about 4 or 5 rod lengths out. I'd bait the bottom of that marginal shelf, and I did it and never fished it for about a month. And I got the swim one morning. I baited up with a few bags. The hook bait was a little dumbbell bottom bait tipped with a bit of plastic. Down it went. I don't think the hook bait has got anything to do with it. I'm just telling you what it was. And 2 hours later, it ripped off, and there was Charlie's Mate, 44 pound and 4 ounces. You know, it proved everything to me. All these things along the line prove things and underscore the things that I'm trying to say. And if I say it to other people, I'm not trying to force people, and I'm not trying to make things trendy. I just think that bait needs to be thought of. more than just a round ball. And it's not, it's full of goodness, full of good things for those carp, and I always get a little bit of a buzz because I think I'm paying them back when I've done what I've done. And yes, it can be an expensive pastime, but I have found more often than not it's the regularity with which you bait up more than the amount that you bait up with. If you keep 15, 20 boilies going onto a spot as often as you can, you know, people moan about the time that they haven't got to go fishing. Leave an hour earlier for work and go down to the lake you're fishing and put them in on a little spot, or an hour after work. Or you can always squeeze in a little bit of extra time to bait up. It's what I did when I was in the army. That's all I ever did, because I had absolutely no time to ever go carp fishing. And that's the way that I caught carp. So I guess in the long run, it's something that's been bred into me over the years, the way that I go about my fishing, where I fish and how I fish and how I use my bait. I suppose the key word now is, how do I use my bait? Because it's the most important thing to me. I tend to be careful with it to begin with. If I'm moving onto a lake I know absolutely nothing about, I'm not going to go down there and fill it in with bait and expect to catch a fish. If it's somewhere that's just going to be a one-off visit, then I will err on the side of caution. I'm still going to use my 10, 15mm response pellets. I'm not going to use anything else, but I'm going to err slightly on the side of caution. I don't believe there's a CARPology that ain't going to come along and have a go at what I'm giving them. It's just maybe the quantity is a bit too much, unless I get to know the venue. If I've got a target fish and I'm going to go somewhere, then things start to get a little bit different the longer I'm there. As my bait starts to work, I will increase the amount that I'm putting in. A regular session, I suppose, on a lake that I know would be about 3 kilos of my little boilie and pellet concoction would be my starting point. Over, say, a couple of rods, and a third rod I'd have roving around, or maybe set up on another spot on its own. Now, of course, at some point I'm going to get a bite, and it's the unanswered question a lot of times. What are you going to do bait-wise once you have got a bite from a spot? I would imagine a lot depends on the amount of fish that you're actually fishing for. If it's a very well-stocked venue, then of course I'm going to put a lot more bait in. You know, I'd probably put maybe another 5 or 6 spods over those rods that I've had a bite on, and keep that going whenever I got some action. On lesser stocked waters, maybe that's not the way. I mean, they're not so common nowadays, these lakes with 9 or 10 fish in, but they are still around. But in the main, we're fishing relatively high levels of stocked lakes, and yeah, bait is, to me, is the key to unlock everything. Once you get those fish competing for it, then you know, bait is the thing that does that, builds that competition, and that is when you'll catch them. Bait, then, for me, it's the most important thing in carp fishing, apart from a sharp hook, and one, incidentally, that I'd never sharpened myself. If I can get those fish feeding how I want, they are infinitely more catchable than ones that are feeding cautiously around the edge of the baited areas. It's a tool as much as anything, and we all need to learn how to use it. And it's one of the things that probably gets more accusations of being useless than it ever should. The blame falls foursquare normally at the angler's door, and we have to have the ability to blame ourselves, because that makes us learn, makes us put it right the next time. Learn how to use your bait, learn what the fish want to accept, and how much or how little you need to use. And once you've got those little things over and done with, I'm sure you'll catch more carp.